To all my white friends who shared their ugly side with me because they thought I was one of them, part of their club. Let me tell you something. If all lives mattered, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If all lives mattered, there'd be no need for all this rage. If all lives mattered, we'd have no war. If all lives mattered, nobody's savior would ever play favorites, no holy ground would ever be wreathed in barbed wire, no infidel would ever be stoned, and the churches would use their tax-free grift to heal the sick and feed the poor and uplift the needy, instead of building gold crosses to honor a savior who healed the sick, fed the poor, and uplifted the needy. If all lives mattered, there'd be no need for high-capacity magazines, and no Walmarts would sell them, and no town would have a Walmart. The struggling underclass being paid shit wages to help enrich wealthy parasites who externalize their costs and internalize their profits and suck the gas out of the economic engine while debasing and exploiting the poor on 2 continents. See, I hear you say, all lives matter, and I understand what you want to say. I know that you can't allow anyone's pain to go observed for even a moment without chiming in about how your Appalachian dirt farmer kin forged a path of rugged self-determination, by their elbow grease and the cut of their jib. I know that when you say, why does it have to be about color? You're sincerely confused because color probably plays a very small role in your daily life. See, there's a big difference between having to issue an apology to Carol in accounting because she overheard your racist joke and being shot 37 times by the police because you were holding a sandwich and they feared for their lives. See, when I hear you say all lives matter, I hear a sentiment, a platitude, a tone-deaf, emotional reaction to a problem that was off your radar until the anger bubbled over like a cauldron and scalded the cities and scared the shit out of you and became less than the respectable, non-threatening humility you feel comfortable with. Because if all lives mattered, pulling your pants up would never ever be a life or death decision. See, if all lives mattered, we couldn't suffer the luxury of apathy and mark with our own scarlet letter whole peoples as a criminal class and tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, completely missing the irony that there's no possible physical way one could ever pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It is fucking impossible. And if all lives mattered, we wouldn't have a ghetto-to-prison pipeline running from the tenement to the cell block. We wouldn't have 120,000 for-profit prisons lobbying your Congress to maintain minimum mandatory sentencing for non-violent drug offenders. So that way they can maintain a publicly subsidized slave labor class with no vote, no right, and no future. I mean, if only all lives mattered, there wouldn't be 95,000 nonviolent drug offenders who could have come from a good family and gone to the right school, Stanford maybe, and then served 3 months for rape instead of 5 years with no parole for a dime bag. If all lives mattered, there wouldn't have been 1,000 fatal police shootings last year, with every single one being ruled justified. Either we have the most righteous cops that the human race has ever seen, or the system is living proof that some lives matter more than others. And if all lives mattered, college sports victories and the inappropriately named Black Friday would be a more ignoble reason to riot than the fury of hopelessness and staring through the windows into the home of a better society. We are not allowed to sit on the furniture. If all lives mattered, we wouldn't have an orange supremacist president for whom the term thug and the term very fine people really depends on where your ancestors and their relative proximity to the equator actually were, vowing to take America back. And I think to myself, from who, motherfucker? Last I checked, wealthy white males not only own this country, but treat it like a hooker who's late with daddy's money. I mean, if all lives mattered, we wouldn't be asphyxiating under the weight of 50 years of zero tolerance and the drug war and broken window policies and the incarceration state with a standing army of paramilitary police. And if all lives mattered, all those Dixie-waving patriots, hoarding ammunition in anticipation of the big government deep state crackdown, they would be demanding freedom for their brothers of all colors instead of, fighting valiantly for their right to open carry at Starbucks like the heroes they are. And if all lives mattered, we wouldn't even know the names of Freddie Gray or Eric Garner or Walter Scott or Tamir Rice or Sandra Bland, and some asshole named George Zimmerman would still be smuggling cell phones up his ass in a Florida prison somewhere, and we never would have had redlining and Jim Crow. If all lives mattered, we'd never had the Tulsa White riots and armed guards protecting schoolgirls. We never would have had manifest destiny on 245 years of state-sanctioned slavery. We wouldn't have 45 million people now below the poverty line. We wouldn't have 0 states where their minimum wage can't even keep your head above water, and rich assholes wouldn't pay less taxes on stock market windfalls than a waitress working for $2 an hour pays on her tips, and poisoned water wouldn't be a byproduct of progress, it would be murder. So don't fucking tell me that all lives matter. If all lives mattered, you wouldn't even have to say it, would you? It would be self-evident. If all lives mattered, the only travesty of justice would be the tragedy of just us. A flawed species, learning to work together, trying all the time to throw off the shackles of our prejudices, superstitions, and become the species we all want to be. Free of our bullshit. Because if all lives mattered, we wouldn't need to have this conversation right now.